arguably the worst metal for an average person to put in their body. And keep in mind, this includes such favorites as copper, mercury, tin, and hair metal. That's just awful. And despite it being hazardous to our health, lead, not hair metal, has had a surprisingly full and wide-ranging past. From the Roman Empire using lead piping to carry water and sewage, to Elizabeth I using white lead in her face whitening cream, to the invention of gunpowder-based projectile weaponry, and even back to the Romans discovering that lead could be used as an artificial sweetener with, let's just say, rather disastrous side effects. Today we know all about the deadly effects of lead and what it can do to a body, but this isn't just some recent development. This has been common sense for centuries. Even Benjamin Franklin, arguably the inspiration for Chevy Chase in Christmas Vacation, wrote about the deadly effects of lead poisoning that he witnessed firsthand in a letter to Benjamin Vaughan back in July 31st of 1786. Ben Franklin said that what he knows about the impacts of lead is still far older than that, telling Vaughan that this mischievous effect of lead is at least above 60 years old. So even before the United States became a country, this was back in the 1720s, everybody knew lead was a poison. It was just common sense. It wasn't something that needed to be brought to everybody's attention. Leap forward a century to 1887, where it seems like everybody forgot lead was a poison, and the United States medical authorities finally diagnosed childhood lead poisoning. Then, in 1904, this Austrian physician by the name of J. Lockhart Gibson linked childhood lead poisoning to lead-based paint. Gibson had discovered that infants would chew on cribs and it'd get into their bodies. Toddlers playing around the house could inadvertently eat some of the lead paint chips that had flaked off the walls. Due to the normal opening and closing of doors and windows, some of the paint would rub off and it would get into the air, and you would have lead dust in the air.
It's a jungle out there. Lead poisoning is lurking to get your little ones.
So this lead dust would get stirred around by everyday movement, and any prolonged exposure to this dust indoors could really damage your body over time.
Lead paint chips for them to nibble on. Lead dust for them to breathe.
I got bronchitis. Ain't nobody got time for that.
But fortunately, in 1909, France, Belgium, and Austria all banned white lead paint for interior use, and the League of Nations followed suit in 1922 along with Greece and Tunisia. But the US declined to adopt that same resolution at the time. Despite these countries and many others banning or severely limiting the use of lead paint, it seems that the petroleum industry wanted to take things a little bit further.
Ethyl gasoline is a high-octane gasoline. Gives more power on the road. Because the higher the octane number, the better the gasoline, the less likelihood of knock. That's the difference.
Yeah, there's a huge difference. One gas is just bad in general. The other gas is bad and can kill you. Despite having alternatives that could have been used instead of leaded gasoline, like alcohol or ethanol, petroleum companies chose to use lead because it led to a larger profit margin. While everyone knew good and well of the dangers of lead, it seemed that the petroleum industry had a disturbingly easy way to go around that.
General Motors Corporation specifically asked the U.S. Bureau of Mines not to refer to the study as a leaded gasoline study, to simply not use the word lead. So they would use a substitute word. They would use the word which was the name of their product, which was ethyl. Now, ethyl is a woman's name, and it's a very nice name for a woman. My grandmother was named Ethel.
Oh, sure, yeah. Let's just call lead ethyl instead. That's a nice, pretty name. You know, that's fine. You know, while we're at it, we can just call mercury puppies. Everybody loves puppies. We'll just start putting mercury in everything. We can just call cyanide bunnies. Everybody thinks bunnies are cute. That's adorable. It'll sell like hotcakes. And you know what? We'll call nuclear waste fluffy kitten yawns. Because who would not want to roll around in a big tub of fluffy kitten yawns? I mean, it's just so adorable. I never thought I would really need to misquote Shakespeare here, but no, leaded gasoline by any other name would still be just as deadly. But despite the manufacturer's best efforts, the dangers soon became very evident.
Loony gas means something that drives you crazy. And that's what the workers called it, because they knew that working in this particular part of the refinery was very dangerous. In the DuPont facility down in Deepwater, somebody had scrawled an enormous butterfly on the side of the wall to represent that this was the house of butterflies, because what was happening was the workers saw butterflies that weren't there. They were hallucinating because the poison was so malicious.
While this may seem like all doom and gloom, the story of tetraethyl lead does end on a happy-ish note with the passage of the Clean Air Act, which prohibited the production of motors that specifically required leaded gasoline. Then, the Environmental Protection Agency began mandating that lead be phased out of gasoline starting in 1973. After that, it seemed that people thought the lead problem in the U.S. was through. Little did people know that lead had actually been creeping in around us for decades, under our very noses, and we just never realized it. Until one day...
Public health crisis of massive proportions. Lead in the water supply in Flint, Michigan. People breaking out in rashes, losing hair.
The trouble with the water in Flint, Michigan just doesn't let up. Now it's the water filters they've been using the last few months after dangerous lead levels were discovered.
Tell me, Mom, it's yellow and it's a filmy, gross, foamy thing, and it would smell like open sewer. But we were being told we're still getting used to the new system. It's safe, it's okay.
And this is by no means just a small incident. This has been going on for years. It's still going on to this day. And according to the state's Department for Environmental Quality, that's almost just fine.
At the time, the state agency told Flint it didn't have to add an anti-corrosive agent to the water, saying it was not necessary until 2 6-month monitoring periods had been conducted.
So, before this problem was even going to be addressed, the state was going to wait a full year just to confirm what Ben Franklin, what everybody, really the world, already knew over 300 years ago. Lead was bad for you, and you shouldn't drink it. It's simple as that. Yet, despite knowing that the water from the Flint River was more acidic, and despite knowing that they had leaded pipes in their city, they didn't think that they needed to add any anti-corrosion agents because it would save them money down the road. Obviously, this is awful, and clearly, people have been harmed. But to what extent? How does lead impact the body? And what exactly does it do to you once it's in your blood? I went to the Family Medical Center to talk with a Dr. Brian Gannon, a 16-year associate professor at the University Medical Center, to find out.
There really is no safe level of lead. Even levels below the EPA recommendations, CDC recommendations.
There is no such thing as a safe level of lead in your blood. It doesn't exist. Even the CDC recommended 5 micrograms per deciliter.
It's too damn high.
How does lead impact the body?
People who've been exposed to low lead levels for long periods especially are more likely to show ADHD behaviors and antisocial behaviors as well.
And what exactly does it do to you once it's in your blood?
You can have acute lead toxicity, which will be at higher amounts, and that can happen really at any age. You might have seizures and coma and that sort of thing. At lower lead levels, often it's not as obvious. Those levels are more likely to show up as just slower development, speech delays. Higher lead levels, you can have low blood count, anemia, you don't get enough oxygen to the brain, kidney failure. Often the toxic effects are not reversible.
Certain zip codes, lower socioeconomic status, older housing, oftentimes public housing. Once these high-risk areas have been identified, it's up to the public health authority to act on that information. But a lot of times, the one thing holding the whole process up is funding. Could it really be that expensive to remove lead? I know you have to have all sorts of safety precautions, masks, suits, you name it. But still, how expensive could that be compared to all the medical costs? According to a 2009 study, the estimated total cost for lead paint removal ranges between $1 and $11 billion, which is a lot of money.
Too much stuff.
But the estimated losses from that lead paint, $11 and $53 billion for healthcare, $165 to $233 billion in lifetime earnings, tax revenue of $25 to $35 billion, special education $30 to $146 million, ADHD disorder $267 million, costs of crime $1.7 billion. And the study concluded that, quote, for each dollar invested in lead paint hazard control results in a return of $17 to $221.
Show me the money!
A net savings of $181 to $269 billion. So for every dollar we invest in lead paint removal, we get between 17 and 221 back in the economy, tax revenue, and just cost savings. In the 70s, the EPA declared their war on leaded gasoline, and now there's no more leaded gasoline. Today, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who actually remembers having to choose between either paying for leaded or unleaded gasoline at a pump. In order to combat indoor lead pollution, there really needs to be more funding for lead removal efforts. But the problem with this, however, is that no one really knows where all these lead pipes are. According to the EPA, the lead pipes have been largely untracked and unmarked, but Congress has consistently, for the past several years, cut the budget of housing and urban development as well as the EPA, the two main groups who would oversee these lead removal efforts. But as evidenced in several lead studies and affirmed by Dr. Gannon, those at a lower socioeconomic status with children are far more likely to be affected by lead poisoning and have huge costs associated with that. And with these cuts to these organizations and other social welfare and public health programs, it really seems unlikely that anything is going to be done soon. I'm afraid that the problem with lead in our homes may only get worse before it gets better.